I'm Wayne Howe, Vice President of the Woodstock Historical Society, and this is our first Ghost Walk where the spirits come alive here at the Lakeside Cemetery. I'm glad to see everybody here that could make it, and it didn't rain, so that was very nice. And I hope you enjoy our presentation. We have 4 people to speak to you today, and then we have some refreshments in the church vestry afterwards. So please enjoy yourself. And I would like to introduce to you our first guest, the Honorable Sidney Perham, Governor of Maine.
Get some mic'd up here. Don't understand this newfangled technology, but all right. Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sidney Perham. I was born in Woodstock on March 27th, 1819. My parents were Joel Perham and Sophronia Bisbee, originally of Paris. I was educated in the local schools and for 1 term at Gould's Academy in Bethel. I married Almina Jane Hathaway on January 1st, 1843, and we had 5 children: Orestes Sidney, Lucy Frances, Georgiana Sophronia, Herbert Morrill, and Willie Lincoln Perham. My career was in agriculture. At 21, I purchased from my father the homestead farm where I had lived from boyhood, and carried on a large farming business for the next 20 years, keeping between 250 and 500 sheep. I would later go on to serve as a member of the Board of Agriculture and also gave numerous addresses on agricultural subjects. My first foray into politics was at the ripe old age of 22 when I became a selectman for the town of Woodstock. I was a Democrat until 1853 when I supported Anson P. Morrill for governor, and I later helped to organize the Republican Party in Maine. In 1853, I was elected to the Maine Board of Agriculture, and in 1854 I became a member of the House of Representatives and served as Speaker of the House for that year. I was the first man in Maine history to be chosen as the Speaker during my first year in the legislature. From 1859 to 1863, I served as the Clerk of the Courts of Oxford County. In 1862, I was elected to the United States House of Representatives. I served in the U.S. House from 1863 until 1869, when I chose not to seek re-election. While in the U.S. House, I served as chairman of the Committee on Invalid Pensions from 1865 to 1869. In 1868, I gave the 2 most notable speeches in my tenure as a representative. On March 2nd, I made an impassioned speech against President Andrew Johnson and his abhorrent violations of our Constitution and laws. On March 21st, I made a well-received speech on the subject of relief from taxation and the national finances. In September 1870, I succeeded the great Civil War hero and our 32nd governor of Maine, Joshua Chamberlain, to become the 33rd governor of this great state. I served 3 terms as governor, which in my day lasted just 1 year each, between 1871 and 1874. Among the causes I advocated for as governor were reform in the jail system so as to provide for the employment of the prisoners in some industrial pursuit, an industrial school for girls, the establishment of free high schools, and biennial elections and sessions for the legislature. But the great cause most dear to my heart was the noble struggle against the curse of intemperance. From an early age, I took an interest in the temperance movement. For many years, I headed the Sons of Temperance and Good Templars in the state, and was many times a representative to the national organizations of both of those orders. I took part in the organization of the first temperance society in Woodstock. William Barry Lapham, who would later write of me in his History of Woodstock, said that among the early advocates of temperance in this town, none did more or better work than Sidney Perham. Thanks to the work of a good many strong-minded, noble souls, the Maine law prohibiting alcohol was one of the first in the nation when it was passed in 1851, and became the model for a dozen other states as they joined us in this glorious benevolent cause. Alas, our Maine law was shamefully repealed in 1856 after a mob of unruly drunkards caused a violent stir in Portland in an event you now refer to as the Portland Rum Riot. So great was my dismay at the law's repeal that in the year 1857 I spoke in 200 towns urging the reenactment of the prohibitory law. I continued to serve in many roles in my later life. From 1873 to 1898, I was president of the Board of Trustees of the Maine Industrial School in Hollowell, and from 1871 to 1873, I was a fellow at Bates College. From 1865 to 1880, I was also president of the Board of Trustees of Westbrook Seminary in Deering. From 1877 to 1885, I was an appraiser in the United States Custom House in Portland, and in 1891, I was appointed by President Benjamin Harrison to select a site for dry dock on the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. My religious faith was Universalism. I became a Universalist at 19 years of age, and while always tolerant of other denominations, throughout my life I was ever dedicated to the work of my church. I was among the founding members of the Woodstock Universalist Church in 1843, as were many other members of my family, and we were among the many supporters who made constructing this building possible in 1853. I served as the first clerk, as a steward, on a committee to raise funds for supporting preaching, and in many other capacities for this church. I served on many occasions as a president of both the state and national Universalist conventions, and for 27 years I was a member of the Board of Trustees of the Universalist General Convention, serving as the president for many of those years. I died in Washington, D.C. on April 9, 1907, where I lived with my family for the last 20 years of my life, while retaining a summer residence at Paris Hill. After my death, I was brought back here to Lakeside Cemetery, where I was laid to rest beside my wife and in the shadow of my beloved old church.
Welcome everyone. I am Dr. William Barry Lapham. You folks are a little late for my birthday. That was a couple of weeks ago. I turned 191. So you're just a little late. I was born in Greenwood actually in August of 1828. I attended the local schools and I went to the Waterville College, which is now Colby, in 1851. I didn't graduate. I went on to several other schools and to learn medicine. I went to New York in 1856. I graduated from the New York Medical College and came back here to Woodstock to practice medicine. I was later on the postmaster of Woodstock, and the Civil War came along, and I raised a company of soldiers for the Civil War, and the federal government said, well, we don't really need them. We've got enough. A couple of months later, Lincoln asked for 400,000 volunteers. So I joined the 7th Maine Light Artillery and served from 1863 through the end of the war. I joined as a lieutenant, and I rostered out of the Light Artillery as a captain, and then went to join the Quartermaster Corps as a major. After the war, I came back to Bryant Pond and married Cynthia Perham. And I believe she's a niece to the governor, but I'm not sure of that. We had 3 children, Mary, Ben, and Fanny. And I wrote a lot of books in my spare time. But I was in the Maine legislature in 1867, and then I was an examining surgeon for the Maine Pension Board for Civil War veterans, and I was a trustee of the Maine Insane Hospital, And from 1872 to 1881, I was editor of the Maine Farmer, which was an agricultural magazine put out at the time. And I was a Maine genealogist from 1875 to 1878. And in 1992, I published my memoirs for the Recollections of the Civil War. And everyone should have read this. And I know most of you have read some of my other books because they were histories of towns and genealogies of various families, the Rickers. That was just one I can mention offhand. And I actually did 26 books altogether. So that's really all I have to say about myself, except that I died in February of 1894 in Augusta and was brought back in, laid to rest. My wife didn't join me until 1914, but you know how that goes. Men always die first, so. And I'd like to thank you all for coming today to meet the various people here. I believe we're going down to meet Ezra next.
Well, looks like it's showtime.
That scoundrel Stevens.
I'd like to welcome you all, ladies and gentlemen, to the Den Stevens Circus. No, wait a minute. By gall, that's wrong, isn't it? Okay. That comes later. My name is Ezra Stevens. I was born in Sumner, Maine, in, let's see, it was in 1931. How about 1831? You have to forgive me, I've been out just a little while here. Anyway, I was born to the parents. My parents were Benjamin Stevens and Abigail Sampson. I had 5 brothers and sisters. However, only one reached maturity and actually got married, other than myself, of course. I knew from a very young age that I had a knack for trading. I could trade, like, jackknives for fishing line and whistles and you name it, I could trade it. And as far as I know, I never got the worst of the deal. And it also seemed to allow me to have, like, the gift of gab. And that worked to my advantage in my later career also. In my young man days, I guess, I became a peddler. And I would go around to all the rural households. I had a couple of tin boxes I'd take with me. And I'd have just about anything that any housewife would want. And if I didn't, then I could get it. Okay? And I always could make a good deal. And let me tell you though, I never lost money on any of my deals either. But I treated them right. And I usually would get invited to a meal, sometimes to stay overnight. I'd sometimes tell stories. Well, probably most of the time I told stories. And sometimes I would also sing. And we got along very well. They were always happy to see me coming. Well, after a while, traveling all this time. Oh, and I always traveled with my 2 foxhounds. I loved hunting. And they were with me all the time. And I do have to kind of give you a little side note there that later on in my life, when I had moved to Bryant Pond, I did have a situation with a gentleman from this town called John Howe, who saw me out with my dogs and accused me of hunting on the Sabbath. And I actually had to go to court on that situation, where I told the judge, honestly, that I was not hunting, I was simply exercising my dogs. And after I paid the court fees, the case was dismissed. So there you go, Mr. Howe. Anyway, getting back to my peddling days. Of course, that's pretty tiring to have to carry those heavy things around. And And I finally decided I need to do something else for a living. So I ended up finding a lovely lady, Laura Andrews, who I married. And we started a store back in Trap Corner down in what is now West Paris. And the store went quite well. And of course, I had somewhat of a name anyway because of my peddling business. And I also knew how to entertain. So in my store, it would not be surprising to have like some maybe wild animal outside that people could come and see, and then they come into my store. Or maybe a parrot, or, you know, just some music sometimes. Have someone playing music just to call people in, and it was great for business. I even had a monkey once. And unfortunately, that monkey disappeared. I couldn't find it anywhere. For 4 days, I couldn't find that monkey. And lo and behold, one day I went in the back room, opened up the heavy cover of the sugar barrel, and by gall, there she was. And yeah, I used the sugar afterwards. Well, anyway, let's see. Laura and I had 9 kids, but I can't remember all the names. So, but, you know, 9 of them. And, you know, the store business was doing quite well. Then something happened in life that just was kind of just a fortunate incident. I went to a fair in Paris Hill. And when I was there, there was a man who had a trained bear. And he was desperate for money. And he was willing to sell his bear for a very reasonable price. So I purchased the bear and found out at that time that I really did have a gift for talking to people, convincing them of things I wanted them to be convinced of. And that was the beginning of my circus days. Slowly I built up other animals, acts, and things, and I started a small circus, which eventually turned out to be about 90 employees. Yeah, I didn't word that right, but it contained like 90 employees, and it took 20 wagons to haul. And we went all over the Northeast, as far as Western New York and the Great Lakes. And we'd start out from Bryant, actually, now I'm getting ahead of myself, because my circus came first, and then in 1866, we moved to what is now Bryant Pond Village. Of course, there wasn't any village here until after the railroad came through in about 1852. So I ended up buying one of the first buildings that was built here. It was on the shop corner right here in the middle of town. And that was my store, and it was called the Corn Crib. And of course, I did still have some animals and entertainments and things, and my circus equipment was kept right next door in my barn. Every spring, we'd start on our road trip and go all out, be back by the fall, and then I would go back to my store running my business. And it didn't hurt my business any that I was becoming a well-known circus person. Now, as far as circuses, I am the one that came up with the circus banner. Now, you might say, well, what is that? Well, you know, we had like about 4 tents, different acts and things in the tents. And usually you'd pay 50 cents to 25 cents to come into the circus. And then there was this 4th tent. And the banners on that tent would talk about the sea serpent, the crocodile, the wild men of Borneo, and all these special creatures and things. And that cost you an extra 25 cents or so. And all you had to do is look on the banner. There's the crocodile. Now, it might only be 3 feet long in reality, but it was bigger than that on the banner. And it got you inside. Now, let's see, some of the other acts that I had, I just mentioned the wild men of Borneo. They were like only about 40 inches tall. And there are pictures of it. You can go out there, look on the internet, and find pictures of me, Ezra, and my wild men. It may even tell you that they actually were born in Ohio. But don't believe it. They were from Borneo. Okay. Now, P.T. Barnum had Tom Thumb. I had Major Homer. And he was about 48 pounds and about 40 inches tall, too. So, take that, P.T. Oh, let's see, what else did I have? I have to think for a while. Oh, well, you know, money is important. And back at this time, ice was quite expensive because it didn't last. You didn't have refrigeration. So whenever we had these punch bowls and things, it seems like the ice always melted too fast. And like I said, ice costs money. So I went to a glass shop and I had them make me a chunk of ice. And when that was put in the punch, it clinked like ice. And it ended up lasting for 2 years. little bits of savings right there. Okay. Let me see here. What else? I have to check my notes here just for a second.
Dancing chicken.
Say what?
Dancing chicken.
Oh, they were not chickens. Dancing turkeys. Yes, one of my favorite acts. Yeah. And nobody really knew but me and the circus people what made them dance. Because the music, they would dance the music. Well, they were standing on, how can I word it? The platform they were standing on had a little charcoal fire underneath it. So they couldn't really stand there without lifting their feet up, and they were dancing. So it worked out pretty good. So anyway, all this circus stuff, I enjoyed it. I could definitely call the people in and make money out of it. And then it was good to rest up in the winter with my store. Now around, let's see, about the 1890s, I was planning to go out again on the circus tour. And three tragedies happened that changed all that. My youngest son, who was just about 11 years old, got sick and he passed away. And then one of my acts, and one of the ladies there that performed, she also passed away. And then my top horse also died. And after that, the circus just kind of went out of my blood. And I decided to retire. So in 1892, I did retire. I had a buffalo. I sold off my buffalo for $800. Sold off a lot of my other equipment. But I did keep some of the wagons and some of my kind of special mementos in the barn next to my store up there in the corner. So, so I ran my store. And then in 99, there was a break-in my store. And we don't know for sure who did it, but rumor had it that it might have been the Merrifield boys from up the hill. And it could have been because they were kind of a wild bunch. But anyway, me and some of my friends were out in the back room of the store, and we were mixing drinks, which was legal, gentlemen. And we'd done it before, but something happened. I don't know if we accidentally got a hold of wood alcohol, or if the mixing container we had once been used for like creosote or something, and it had some, whatever. When we were drinking, one of my friends said, "This tastes kind of funny, doesn't it?" And I said, "Oh, don't let that bother you there." And we just kept drinking. Well, that night, this was like July 6th, 1899. After drinking with my buddies, I got violently sick. And I died just before midnight. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, but one of my friends also died early the next morning. And my other two drinking partners were extremely sick, but they did survive. So that was kind of the end of my story, but I do have one little addendum as far as my circus equipment. In 1907, there was a big fire in town on the corner, which destroyed, what was the name of the hotel? The Glen Mountain House, which was basically beside my store and my barn, and the fire spread. Well, they started a bucket brigade. They called the hand tub from Bethel. They brought up one from Norway by train, and they were able to stop the fire from spreading across the street, but it did destroy my store and the barn that contained most of my artifacts that I still had in it. My son George rescued some of the things, but most of them went up in flames. And that's kind of the end of my story. So, thank you.
I am no more a child of earth. My spirit from its clay has fled, and I linger round this spot where they have made my low last bed. Hello, my name is Cora, and I died in Highland Park, Florida in 1884. I was laid to rest here beside my mother, Abby Lorenda. My mother was the wife of John Cotton Andrews, who was born to Ziba and Thankful, who are buried in South Woodstock. They were married in 1824 in Paris, then came to Woodstock before 1826. Ziba and his son John were both Baptist preachers. John was also a Woodstock postmaster from 1860 to 1864. Back then, post offices were kept in people's homes and businesses. They were a place where people would gather to discuss the news. Many people at that time did not know how to read, so people at the post office who could read would read many letters out loud, spreading the news. There was a post office at Andrews Mills after the train came. Andrews Mills was located near the coffin factory on the brook in South Woodstock and was started by Ziba, John's father, in 1827. After the train came to town in 1851, Isaac Andrews was the postmaster at the Bryant Pond Post Office. At this time, there were 4 post offices: North Woodstock, South Woodstock, Woodstock, and Bryant's Pond. Reverend John Cotton Andrews died in Los Angeles, California in 1920, and he had remarried Mary M. in 1851 from New Hampshire. He is buried in the Rosedale Cemetery in Los Angeles. Thankful, who was Reverend John C. Andrews' mother, is related to myself by marriage. She is the granddaughter of Stephen of Bridgewater and the great-granddaughter of Ephraim. And Thankful was the daughter of Stephen Washburn and had a twin named Mercy. They were born in Paris, and Stephen bought a mill in North Paris at the outlet of Moose Pond. Stephen was a descendant of John Alden, the cooper on the Mayflower. And that's the end of my story.